Hey there, viewers! Welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe so you can get new stories every day. Carla Evans has always believed in building something solid, a strong marriage and a future home. For 25 years, she's stood by her husband Mark, facing all the challenges and setbacks together. She was right there when he was just a struggling businessman, helping him to build his company from the ground up, even at the cost of her own dreams, so their dreams could take flight. They had a system in place. Carla handled the finances while Mark focused on growing their wealth. They didn't just live comfortably, they thrived. They were living the dream in a beautiful house in a fancy neighborhood, enjoying the luxurious lifestyle that Carla had always wanted. That was until another woman came along. Alice Monroe was this young blonde with a smile that could charm the devil. Carla noticed her name on Mark's phone a few months before everything fell apart. At first, she brushed it off, not wanting to be one of those women. But then came the sudden business trips, missed anniversaries, and the inattentiveness. He even met up with Alice while still keeping Carla on the back burner. The financial nightmare that followed turned into a real war for Carla. Once living a life of luxury, she was now barely making ends meet. Mark, who had promised her that they would always be safe, left her with almost nothing. Everything, the businesses, the investments, the property, was all in his name. "You'll get what's fair," Mark said in his smooth, patronizing voice. "Let's not make this ugly." Carla wanted to believe him, but then she saw the bank statements. Their joint accounts had been wiped out, and the property was quietly transferred over. Mark's company is now just his. He played the game well, leaving her the house, but what's the point of a house if she can't afford the mortgage? He left her with memories while he ran off to enjoy his new life with Alice. Carla was fuming, but she wasn't about to give up. The courtroom was packed as usual, and Mark sat confidently next to Alice, who was practically glowing with satisfaction. She didn't even bother hiding her joy, whispering things to Mark between giggles, her manicured nails tapping away, without a legal team in sight. She was really holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth actually existed. The process dragged on. Carla's lawyer, a decisive but overwhelmed guy named James Harding, claimed that Mark had purposely moved his assets to avoid splitting them up in the divorce. Mark's lawyer, a sharply dressed dude whose suit probably cost more than Carla's monthly expenses, just laughed it off. "Mr. Evans is simply making smart financial choices," he said with a smirk. Carla clenched her fists and let out a sigh when the judge called for a break. She stood up. To get some fresh air, Carla stepped out into the hallway, but as she passed by Mark and Alice, she caught Alice smirking at her. "Sorry, babe," Alice whispered loudly enough for Carla to hear. "Maybe next time. Don't let yourself go." Mark chuckled quietly and shook his head. The laughter sounded like a knife to Carla's chest. Nanny leaned in with a smirk and added, "By the way, if you're curious, he's been cheating on you for years. Not just with me." Carla felt her body go numb, but she didn't say a word. She just walked away because that was all too much. Alice didn't realize that neither of them knew what was really going on, that Carol had the final move and was planning to change everything about the will, which had already flipped everything upside down just 3 weeks before the court date. Then came a shocking text from Amiri. On the other end was her lawyer. But not just any lawyer. This was Mark's father, Henry Evans, who had passed away a few months ago. He was a man of strict principles and had a deep respect for family. Carol thought that, like everything else, the inheritance would go straight to Mark, but she was wrong. Henry Evans was aware of his son's infidelities and judged them harshly. In his last act, Henry did something no one, not even Mark, saw coming. He rewrote his will, leaving everything to neither his son nor his daughter-in-law. In the courtroom, the moment of truth arrived, and Carla's heart was racing as she listened to Mark's lawyer claim that she was entitled to nothing. The judge nodded slowly and turned to Carla's lawyer, asking if they had anything else. James Harding stood up, his face completely unreadable. "We would like to present new evidence," he said. A murmur went through the courtroom as James approached the judge's bench and handed over a thick folder, wearing a confident smirk. Mark fidgeted while Alice raised an eyebrow. The judge flipped through the documents, reading the lines carefully. Then there was a long pause, and the judge cleared his throat. "I think we need a break." Mark frowned. "What's going on?" Alice crossed her arms, clearly annoyed, but Carla just sat there calmly because she knew this was the beginning of the end for Mark and Alice. When the judge came back after the break, there was a hush in the courtroom, filled with anticipation. Just a few minutes ago, Mark had been sitting back relaxed, but now he was sitting up straight, and a look of tension was starting to creep onto his face. Alice, still wearing that smug grin, leaned in closer and whispered, "Just relax." "Mr. Evans," the judge cleared his throat. "I've reviewed the new evidence presented by the plaintiff, and I must say, this development is quite impressive." Marco, the lawyer, straightened up in his chair. "Your Honor, if I may, I won't allow it," the judge interrupted, his tone stern. "This court takes the fraudulent misappropriation of assets very seriously." Carla sneaked a glance at Marco for the first time. He was no longer smirking and was starting to sweat. "Moreover," the judge continued, "and I learned that the late Henry Evans' inheritance was a big deal." "Take this inheritance seriously," she said, looking over at Mark. "His father couldn't stand her and would never leave her anything." But then, almost as if responding to Alice's arrogance, the judge picked up a document and read aloud. "I, Henry Evans, being of sound mind, hereby declare that due to my son Mark's disloyalty and lack of moral character, I do not leave my inheritance to him. Instead, I bequeath everything. My sister-in-law Carly Evans seems to be in a state of shock as a reward for her loyalty, dignity, and unwavering strength in the face of my son's legal troubles." The courtroom fell silent. Carly wore a blank expression, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. On the other side, Mark looked like he had just been hit in the face with a brick. "What?" Alice exclaimed, jumping up from her seat. Mark's lawyer was rifling through his note. "Your Honor, this must be a mistake." "No mistake here," the judge said, tapping the papers in front of him. "These documents are legally binding. Signed and notarized, the inherited assets, which include 3 properties, several investment portfolios, and a trust worth $75 million, now belong to Miss Carla Evans." Mark's mouth dropped open. Alice laughed, but her laughter now sounded unsure and a bit arrogant, like it had all day. It was that kind of hysterical laugh you get when you realize you've lost everything. "No, no, no," Mark muttered, shaking his head. "This has to be a joke." "It's not a joke," Carla finally spoke up, her voice calm and measured as she turned to him. "When she locked eyes with the one who betrayed her, your father was a good man, and he definitely knew what you were about." Mark's face turned red, and he started to speak, but the judge cut him off. "I strongly advise you to stay silent, Mr. Evans, to avoid making things worse." Carla saw the panic on Mark's face, the realization that he was no longer the winner. Then Alice, clearly unable to grasp what just happened, turned to Mark and said, "You told me we had money, that we'd be set for life," she shouted, her carefully applied makeup cracking as her face twisted in distress. They twisted in anger. "What the hell is this?" Mark turned to his lawyer. "Fix this." But the lawyer just sighed. "It's all in the will, Mark. Your dad cut you out. Case closed." Alice still didn't get it. She turned to Carla, her eyes blazing. "You planned all this, didn't you? Tell me the truth." Carla tilted her head, weighing her words. Did she know about the will? Until today, no. Did she hope for justice? Now, watching Alice's world fall apart, she let herself feel a bit of satisfaction. With a satisfied smile, Carla whispered so Alice could hear, "Don't celebrate too soon." Alice charged ahead, but the guards quickly stepped in and pulled her back before she could reach Carla. "You're a gold digger," the fox shouted. "You think you've won, but you're still all alone. No man will ever want you. You'll die lonely, Carla didn't flinch. She just smoothed her bag and said, "Here's the difference between you and me, Alice. I don't need a man to win." With that, she walked out. In the courtroom, as she raised her head, Mar and Ollie were anxiously waiting outside. Carla took a deep breath, feeling something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. The press was already outside, cameras flashing, reporters firing off questions, but she ignored them. She had nothing to say. "Carla, wait!" Mark was standing there, his confidence gone, his nice suit now meaningless. He felt like he had nothing left. "Hey!" He hesitated for a moment, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know I messed up. I should have treated you better," he continued, his voice trailing off. He's quieter now. "I was foolish, I get it. But we built something real. Carla, you and I." She just looked at him. If this were 2 years ago, maybe she would have listened to him, maybe she would have wanted to believe that some part of Mark was still the guy she married. But that guy's been gone for a while, and now she was finally free. Carla smiled and then said the words that had been burning inside her for months. "You made your choice, and I'm making mine." She turned to walk away but paused, just long enough to drive the point home. The last knife in the back, and oh, she met his gaze. "Maybe you should check Alice's account," Mark frowned. But when he turned around, Alice had already vanished. She took everything he had left. And just like that, Mark was left with nothing. No money, no inheritance from his father, not even his wife, the one he fought so hard for. Reality hit him like a truck. Carlo got all the inheritance from his dad. The property, the investments, everything he built. He thought he had outsmarted her, but his fingers trembled as he pulled out his phone. He tried to call her. He picked up the call right away, but it went straight to voicemail. Then, as if fate wanted to dig the knife in deeper, he got a notification from his banking app. There was a huge withdrawal. Alice had wiped out his personal accounts, the ones he kept separate from the business, the ones she shouldn't have had access to. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She must have gotten his passwords a few months ago. He was so distracted. His knees buckled. Alice didn't just leave him. She cleaned him out completely. On the other hand, Carl felt a bit lighter. For all those years she spent sitting in her lawyer's car, her phone was buzzing with messages from friends, acquaintances, even reporters asking for comments, but she ignored them all. She focused on what was next. Now she had $75 million, a fortune she never expected, but she planned to use it wisely. Her first move? Regain control. That night, I reached out to my financial team and started restructuring my assets. Mark's former partners were more than happy to work with her now. Turns out that most of them never really loved Mark anyway. And what about the property? She wasn't planning to live alone in that huge mansion. Instead, she sold it for a good price and moved into a lavish but cozier house. She wasn't looking for a place. She was looking for a fresh start. But then, a few weeks later, fate delivered something sweeter than revenge. Mark had nothing left. His bank accounts were wiped clean, his father's fortune was gone, his company tanked, and as if that wasn't enough, the IRS came knocking. An investigation into his financial history revealed that in his desperate attempt to hide money during the divorce, he committed tax fraud, and now he was facing some serious charges. Carla found out about it one morning over coffee. She read the headline and shook her head with a smile, realizing she didn't even have to lift a finger. Mark had really done a number on himself. And then, as if fate wanted to give her one last gift, she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of her, and when she answered, a familiar voice, weary and desperate, broke through the line. It was Mark. She almost laughed. It was the same guy who had left her for another woman, the same guy who had drained their savings and tried to leave her with nothing, the same guy who had mocked her in court. And now he was begging. "I know I don't deserve this," he started. His voice was tense. "But I need your help, Carla." She leaned back in her chair, sipping her coffee. "Help? You?" He took a shaky breath. "I have nothing. Alice took everything. The tax office is after me. There wasn't even a place to spend the night, and she almost felt sorry for him. But then she remembered the years of betrayal, how he mocked her, just like Alice did when they were in court. Carla took another sip of her coffee, letting the silence drag on long enough to make him squirm. Finally, she said in a voice as cold as steel, "That's your problem." And that was it. She didn't hear from Mark again. A year later, Carla was thriving. She invested in charities, traveled to places she'd always dreamed of, and most importantly, she found herself. She never got married because happiness was on her own terms. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't about money, and it wasn't even about watching Mark suffer. It was about living well. Sitting on her sun-soaked balcony looking at the ocean, Carla finally realized she hadn't lost Mark. She had escaped from him. And that was the biggest victory of all. Dear viewers, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more. Tell us what you think about this story and where you're watching from.